JonBenet was an entertainer. She would entertain at the drop of a hat.
She loved to sing and dance and perform. It was a natural for her.
I competed with JonBenet. She had all these wonderful costumes and outfits, and she had this presence.
Third runner-up, JonBenet Ramsey.
It wasn't really a competition to her. It was more of like, this is fun, like let's go on stage and do that.
My name is JonBenet Ramsey, and I'm 5½.
What is your favorite animal at the zoo?
The monkeys, because they laugh and stuff and hang around.
Today, that little girl would be 30 years old.
I was her age. She would be my age now. She would be pursuing her own career. She never got to grow up. She is frozen in time now.
Well, the police were convinced pretty early on that Patsy and/or John were involved. And you had a district attorney's office that was saying, not so fast. And that created enormous tension between the two.
Did you hear anything yesterday? I think there are some new developments.
Alex Hunter, the district attorney, wanted someone to come in with fresh eyes in this case and look at it from the perspective of a defense attorney. Who might have killed JonBenet as an intruder, not just the parents, but from the outside?
Boulder DA Alex Hunter brought Lou Smith out of retirement to help solve the Ramsey case.
One of the great challenges is to try to do the case right. And, you know, I think we're making efforts to meet that challenge by involving people like Lou Smith.
The legendary investigator, Lou Smith. He had a history of closing cases.
He had such tenacity. He was a bulldog. Once he got something in his mind, you know, once he got the reins in his teeth, he was not letting go.
Lou Smith was my father. He was just known as, you know, the detective that solved cases. When he got to a murder scene, he spent time dictating everything he saw. Where the sun was in the sky, what the weather conditions were like, what the neighboring houses looked like.
Our grandfather was a detective on one of the biggest unsolved murders in our generation. Prior to this case, Lou Smith had investigated over 200 homicide cases that led to arrests and convictions. Lou dedicated a big part of his life to finding JonBenet's murderer.
When he started his investigation, he felt like everybody else did, that it was probably one of the two parents.
It seemed as though the parents were probably involved in it. I thought this would be a fairly easy case. I thought it would be a slam dunk. And I even remember talking to my daughter, I kind of joked with her, saying that, you know, if somebody did get in the house, it must have been Santa Claus coming down the chimney.
It was within a couple of days after my dad started on the investigation, when he had a chance to review pictures, the evidence, that he was already saying, I think that they need to look the other way. He was already noting in his journal that he felt that they needed to look at an intruder.
Lou came up with the intruder theory. You can't think about that theory without associating it with Lou Smith.
The first thing that stood out to him was an open window in the basement. There was a suitcase propped up against it.
He didn't buy the Boulder Police Department's conclusion that no one could get in that basement window. He began to say maybe somebody did get into that house.
I'll show you how easily it can be done.
So what did Lou Smith do? He went and climbed in the window himself with a camera rolling to prove that it could be done.
It really wasn't that difficult coming in that window.
But some say that the idea of somebody going in the window is complicated by something else that's spotted in the images of the crime scene.
When you go to a photograph of the actual window, there are cobwebs in the window, which could support that no one did go through this window. The big question is, could you have gotten through this window, this small window, without disturbing this cobweb? I think the answer to that is maybe. But the other important point is, how soon was this picture taken after JonBenet was killed because spiders can replicate webs very fast.
Also found in the basement by JonBenet's body, a shoe print, high-tech brand that did not match any shoes in the Ramseys' house. And then there's the high-tech footprint as well.
Then there's the high-tech footprint found next to JonBenet that I think the investigators believe, and maybe rightly so, that that's the bad guy's footprint.
Some argue the footprint could have been inadvertently left by police officers there at the scene. But another factor in Lou Smith's investigation, two strange marks on JonBenet's face and back.
The marks themselves, both on the back and on the face, were the same distance apart. Suddenly a little light went on, and it was just like, wait a minute, it was a stun gun.
Smith looked at other murders where a stun gun was known to have been used. He examined images of a crime victim who had a known stun gun injury.
And the marks are very similar to the face of JonBenet.
He also looked into an experiment performed using stun guns on pigs. These marks were also the same as the marks found on JonBenet.
When we did the pigs, we get perfect marks, just almost like on the back of JonBenet.
This brings back our grandpa's whole motto that things are usually what they seem. Don't make it complicated.
There's no reason at all for the Ramseys to use a stun gun, and the Ramseys don't have a stun gun. If it's not a stun gun, what is it? That's the question I always ask. You tell me what it is.
So everybody sort of poo-pooed and ridiculed the intruder theory until Lou Smith started to stand up and point out things that everybody else, from the Boulder PD to the general public at large, had overlooked or dismissed. He said, wait a second, we need to look at this again. It actually is possible. It actually is plausible. And in his view of it, it's actually the most likely thing that happened.
The police and the district attorney are at odds. The DA is looking at the intruder theory, the police focused on the parents, but both want to get the Ramseys to come in for a formal videotaped interrogation.
Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it.
Lou Smith thought that the Ramseys were being targeted unfairly.
I thought there was something drastically wrong. I had seen evidence of an intruder.
Within a few weeks of JonBenet's murder, police had an important clue: the discovery of foreign DNA on her body.
Crime scene detectives discovered DNA underneath JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear that did not match anybody in the Ramsey family. That was not something that was made public for quite a long time.
They knew at the time that there was DNA in her panties, that it was mixed foreign DNA, and that it was not from Ramsey's DNA, not Patsy's, not John's, and not Burke's.
Detective Lou Smith was like, whoa, while you're pouring water all over the intruder theory, you're not revealing that you have found unidentified DNA and it doesn't match anybody in the Ramsey family.
Lou is just incensed that the focus is still being, well, it could be Patsy, maybe we need to get her to confess.
The Ramseys had been interrogated by police 4 months after JonBenet's death. But now authorities want the Ramseys to come in again for a formal videotaped interrogation.
There were months and months of negotiations. Things about whether they could be videotaped. What are the questions going to be? Should the Boulder police be a part of it? Because the Ramseys said, we don't trust the police. We don't want them there.
Ultimately, the interrogation took place at a different police department.
And at the end, the Boulder police had to watch it from another building.
The Ramseys finally sit down with the police for a videotaped interrogation in June 1998, a year and a half after JonBenet's murder.
Today is Wednesday, June the 24th, 1998. I'm president of the Broomfield Police Department. Tricia Ramsey.
Tom Haney, who was one of the most respected homicide detectives out of Denver, was chosen to interview Patsy Ramsey.
Patsy Ramsey had 1.5 years to prepare. I knew that it was going to be tough to get a spontaneous response.
Do you ever recall purchasing black duct tape like this? It seems like there can't be a house in the world that doesn't have duct tape because it repairs everything.
Well, I never liked it because it's so gooey. Isn't it gooey?
He started out softly and kindly and curious, and then he got pointed with his questions, and that made Patsy angry.
If I told you right now that we have, in the process of being examined, trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of JonBenet, what would you tell me?
That is totally impossible. Go retest.
How is it impossible?
I did not kill my child. I didn't have a thing to do with it.
She said it was impossible that we had physical evidence linking her to the crime.
I'm talking about scientific evidence.
I don't give a flying flip how scientific it is. Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it.
I am so taken with her swagger. She just tells them, you know, you think you have some evidence on me? Well, you better look again.
We love that child, okay? We're not involved. Read my lips. Let's find out who is.
She's very feisty. She's very combative. And that doesn't mean she's guilty, but it doesn't mean she's innocent either.
My life has been hell from that day forward. And I can't stand the thought of thinking somebody's out here walking on the street. God knows we might do it again to some other child. You know, quit screwing around asking me about things that are ridiculous and let's find the person that did this.
Lou Smith was assigned to interrogate John Ramsey.
When Lou interviewed someone, he pried anything out of people just by being understanding and really listening.
Now, John, and I know this is, we're touching right back on a very delicate spot, but was this tape wrapped around anywhere, or was it stuck down? It was very firm across her lips.
I thought John was much more measured and composed. You don't see the drama. I see a lot of pain in that man.
Reached out, flipped the latch, opened the door, and knew immediately what I found.
Okay, and you say immediately?
There was a white blanket, and I just knew I found her.
I think those tapes were so intriguing to watch, but the bottom line is there's nothing there that they could use to say, aha, we've got you.
Both John and Patsy deny in the interrogations that anyone in their family killed JonBenet.
And we want to do everything we can to help solve this case for you.
My dad's conclusions after that interview were just firmed up his belief that the Ramseys had nothing to do with this murder.
I'm not saying parents don't kill their kid. Parents do kill their children. So, but they're trying to say Patsy did. Their actions before, during, and after are all consistent with innocent people. You didn't do it.
My dad started getting frustrated as time went on because he felt that the case against the Ramseys was being slanted where no other evidence was coming in.
I thought there was something drastically wrong and that there was a gross injustice in this case. I had seen evidence of an intruder in the house that night.
Lou Smith thought that the Ramseys were being targeted unfairly, and he didn't believe the police were listening to him.
Smith so strongly disagrees with the prosecutor's focus on the Ramseys that he is resigning from the case, saying, "The case tells me John and Patsy Ramsey did not kill their daughter."
He wrote a letter to Alex Hunter telling them that he couldn't be a part of the persecution of these people, is how he termed it.
He wrote, "I intend to stand with this family and somehow help them through this and find the killer of their daughter."
My dad may have resigned from the district attorney's office, but he never stopped work on the case. He walked in JonBenet's shoes, and he owed it to her, he felt, to continue his investigation.
One thing Lou Smit fought to do was tell a grand jury his side of the story, the intruder theory.
There were too many questions, in particular, that DNA in the underwear that appears to have been from a man didn't match anyone they knew of.
Grand jurors arrived at the Boulder County Justice Center this morning and were escorted into the courthouse by sheriff's deputies.
I think Alex Hunter got shamed into calling a grand jury. I mean, he didn't do it until September 1998, almost 2 years later. And I think the media pressure and the pressure from the police department forced him to do it.
Good morning, Counsel.
And remember, this is after O.J. Simpson, where most people think that evidence of Simpson's guilt was insurmountable.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
And yet, he walked. Alex remembered that. He told me one time, I don't want to spend 2 years of my life and $5 million of the taxpayers' money and lose in court.
Alex Hunter sat a grand jury for 13 months.
Are you surprised by anything you've seen?
No.
Over 13 months, those people heard over 100 witnesses.
My name is Jonathan Webb. I was a grand juror on the JonBenet Ramsey case. It bothers me that the murder of a little girl like this has gone on unsolved for essentially a quarter century.
Members of the Boulder grand jury looked very much like detectives themselves as they finally toured the Ramsey house.
From a crime scene perspective, it was very disturbing how she was found. She's on a concrete floor, a garrote around her neck, and she's 6 years old. That's pretty horrible.
Webb told us that the grand jury spent most of their time focused on two main issues. First, who wrote that ransom note?
We heard from 3 handwriting experts, and even though the handwriting experts couldn't definitively say that she wrote it, they all 3 came to the same conclusion that it could have been Patsy Ramsey.
The Ramsey defense team had their own experts who said that the comparison between the writing on the ransom note and Patsy's handwriting was not conclusive. We asked an expert to weigh in on the case.
My name is Jennifer Nasso. I am a forensic document examiner. Handwriting is a great piece of evidence to have because you can identify the writer of a piece of writing. Throughout the ransom note, there's potential that the author attempted to disguise their writing. It doesn't look smooth and fluid. It's very, very shaky. So it looks like someone was purposely trying to shake their hand to alter the way that the writing looks. This is an example from the ransom note, where you see that kind of typewritten formation of the letter A. This is also from the ransom note, where you see that regular printed A. There are similarities between the ransom note and Patsy Ramsey's writing. However, the similarities that are seen are very general in nature. They're characteristics that many people execute within their writing. So here is another example. This formation seen in the ransom note is 2 strokes, where there's the stroke downward, the pen is lifted up, and then the bowl is created. Right here, again, from the ransom note, where it starts the formation of the bowl and terminates upward. So down here are examples of Patsy Ramsey's known writing. And you do see some of those formations again. That is significant that we see each of the formations represented, but keep in mind this is one letter from the whole ransom note. Is it possible that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note? Yes. Is it possible someone else wrote the ransom note? Yes.
And the grand jury believed that she wrote it.
The second focus for this grand jury, according to Jonathan Webb, was the viability of the intruder theory.
Smit actually presented his intruder theory to the grand jury.
This is the very first photo taken of the training room basement window. The window was wide open. Now, if I was a detective, I'd have said, wow, this is entry.
But the grand jury wasn't buying the intruder theory because of those cobwebs in the window.
The intruder theory didn't make sense to the grand jury. The Boulder police had photographed cobwebs. So for someone to get through a small opening like that and not disturbing a cobweb would be remarkable.
A grand jury does not decide guilt or innocence the way a regular jury does. The grand jury is only there to decide whether or not there is probable cause to charge the suspects with a crime.
We were troubled by, to what level of confidence do we need to have to vote to indict? And it's the preponderance of the evidence, which means greater than 50%. And soon after that, we voted to indict.
Both Patsy and John are accused of permitting a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenet Ramsey. And then in the other one, did unlawfully, knowingly, and feloniously render assistance to a person with intent to hinder the apprehension of the person. These two things together make it clear that the grand jury couldn't point the finger at one or the other, but that they were convinced that it was one of the two of them and that the other one helped.
This is 7 News at 5.
There is high anticipation in Boulder right now for a Ramsey decision, and we are about to hear an announcement from Boulder DA Alex Hunter.
I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time.
I was shocked. It's extremely unusual for a grand jury to vote to charge and the DA not charge.
And you think it was the right decision?
I think it was the right decision. I think no matter what you think about the case, I think that they would never have gotten a conviction.
Thank you very much.
There were too many questions, in particular, that DNA in the underwear that appears to have been from a man didn't match anyone they knew of.
We've done all this work to try and vet the Ramseys. What work have we done to truly vet other potential suspects in this case?
That's why Lou Smith continued investigating even after he resigned from the case.
Lou Smith calls me cold, and I said to him, I've been praying for somebody to call and one to listen. Well, I believe a friend of mine killed her.
But I think what turned this whole case has always been DNA. The killer left behind, I believe, part of his DNA.
Over nearly 13 years, Lou took all of the information that he had on this case and developed a database. In this particular murder, he thought that DNA would solve this case.
But Lou Smith couldn't have imagined the advances in DNA that were to come, advances that would lead to a number of big surprises in the case.
What was developed is a thing called touch DNA. So I just touched this picture, I touched the table. I've now left skin cells on both locations. In theory, that could be scraped, and they could match that up to my DNA.
In 2008, the then district attorney for Boulder, Mary Lacey, decided to do a new round of DNA testing on JonBenet's pajama leggings.
More than a decade later, the items were retested and they found something new. Remember, the previous analysis had already found DNA from an unknown male under JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear. Now, this new touch DNA uncovered DNA from at least one unknown male, maybe two, on her leggings as well.
That's a pretty big thing. That's a pretty clear indication that somebody else was there. You've got DNA now in 3 places on JonBenet's body that doesn't match anybody in the Ramsey family, anybody, and nobody knows whose it is.
And so I think that's what drove the district attorney to make a comment that she's basically not going to look at the family any longer.
The news broke here at the district attorney's office with this incredible letter to JonBenet's father.
DA Mary Lacey wrote John Ramsey, "We do not consider your immediate family, including you, your wife Patsy, and your son Burke, to be under any suspicion in the commission of this crime."
John Ramsey appeared on a local newscast.
We're certainly grateful for an acknowledgement that we are innocent, that this was an intruder, which of course we've always maintained.
Somewhere, somehow, there may be a match to that DNA. Then you got your killer.
Our killer, JonBenet, how many victims has he had in the past? And how many victims is he going to have in the future? And so this killer could still be murdering even today.
Lou Smith spent years organizing and investigating the evidence in the JonBenet Ramsey murder case, but eventually he ran out of time.
When he got sick with cancer, he knew that his time was limited. And so during that time, he just talked to others about not letting this case die.
He had people coming every single day, 60 to 70, 80 people a day, coming to see him. And they said their goodbyes. And during that time, he would still talk about the case.
I remember about the last 3 days, he had slipped into a coma, and the conversations would become one way, you know, and I don't know if he could hear me or not.
It's very much an honor to be here to celebrate Lou Smith's life and to share my thoughts with you. I'm John Ramsey. I had the opportunity to visit Lou a week before he died. Remarkably, during that time together, Lou talked a lot about the case. He hadn't given up. He never gave up.
When Lou Smith died, he passed the torch of the JonBenet Ramsey investigation onto his daughter, Cindy Mara, and she took it.
And he just said, I have a name. I want you to write it down. And I did. And he said, that's where you start. You know, we'd be glad to pay that. We don't have that electronic report, so we would need Boulder to send it. After my dad died, you know, a couple of us, our family, and then some of his old homicide partners, we just formed a team.
You want to go down to number 2, because that is an in-state one.
Yep.
What we all share in common is that commitment to fulfill Lou's dying wish, that this case doesn't die with him. And I think it's that devotion, that respect, that love for Lou is what keeps our team moving forward.
There were a whole host of other possible suspects.
This is Bill McReynolds, the local Santa in town.
There's no way in the world that I could be involved in the death of this little girl. I adored her.
What a perfect suspect. Santa Claus. Wouldn't that have just tied it all up in a nice little bow?
Grandpa stated that if you can't show me a motive, show me evidence of bad character. If you can't show me evidence of bad character, show me evidence.
He had condensed everything he knew about every person of interest into a spreadsheet.
The team that his family created is confident that the killer's name is on that spreadsheet.
So what do we know about the person suspected of killing JonBenet Ramsey? The DA says the genetic profile from the DNA belongs to a male.
There were a whole host of other possible suspects, ranging from known criminals to friends of the Ramseys.
Brad, investigators looked beyond the Ramsey family. In fact, there was some speculation into potential involvement by 2 local men, correct?
Correct. Here you have Gary Oliva.
He was a homeless man who hung out at a church just a block and a half from the Ramseys' home. And he confessed that he killed JonBenet Ramsey. In fact, he called a friend right after she was killed, crying, sobbing, saying he just killed a little girl.
They took a look at him, but eventually eliminated him because there's absolutely no connection between he and the Ramseys, and his DNA, they used that to eliminate him. This is Bill McReynolds, the local Santa in town.
I was the Santa Claus for 3 years at their party, and I always liked the Ramsey party, so I called Patsy in particular and said it's time for our party.
And apparently JonBenet had made a comment that he, Bill McReynolds, was coming to their house to see JonBenet I think everybody thought that was a little weird. His DNA didn't match, and he's out of the picture.
And then this is someone who actually gets brought up quite a bit. This is Michael Helgoff, and this was high on Lou Smith's list.
Michael Helgoff was an interesting character.
Lou Smith calls me cold, and I said to him, I've been praying for somebody to call and want to listen. Mike said he wanted to kill himself to get it over with, and that's one thing. And then he said that him and a partner were going to make $50,000 or $60,000 at Christmas. He wanted to crack a human skull.
Michael Helgoff evidently committed suicide the day after the Boulder District Attorney threatened that, hey, we're going to find you.
The list of suspects narrows. Soon there will be no one on the list but you.
So he committed suicide after authorities said they were narrowing their list.
Right.
He had a stun gun and he had high-tech boots.
Correct. Stun gun, a bit odd for people to have. High-tech boots, fairly common thing for people to have. But the real clincher would be DNA didn't match, and he has no connection to the Ramsey family.
So he was ruled out.
And he was ruled out.
And then Brad, who could forget John Mark Carr?
Of course.
He made quite the headline.
I love JonBenet. Died accidentally. No.
Everyone probably around the world knows John Mark Carr.
Her death was an accident.
So you were in the basement?
Yes.
Problem is, he wasn't in Boulder, Colorado when she died, and his DNA didn't match.
And that was it. He was ruled out. What does it say about the state of this case and the possibility of ever solving it?
Well, that's a big question.
We went through the people of interest, the suspects, and came up with our top 20.
Take a look at it and run it through their program.
What our team has been doing is focusing on collecting DNA and testing DNA.
Do you want to get in touch with them? Who wants to?
I think we should make the effort.
Do you want to just start like maybe in September?
And since Lou has passed away, the team has been able to clear a number of people from that list. However, the work is pretty slow because of the time and expense involved in locating somebody on that sheet and obtaining their DNA and then testing it.
We have asked suspects for their DNA, and in other cases, we've, I guess, done it the old-fashioned way with surveillance and trickery.
We've gotten together and followed people and gotten a discarded cup or some such thing.
So the DNA is evolving constantly, so we're in better position today than we've ever been to solve the JonBenet Ramsey case.
We are just trying to eliminate people from that list. And we just figure if we keep at it, hopefully we'll finally whittle it down to one person remaining on that list.
Lou Smith's family believes that all but one person on that list is innocent.
Who murdered JonBenet Ramsey?
Will the case ever be prosecuted?
Is it still just as mysterious today as it was in 1996?
Absolutely.
I think it's even more mysterious now to some degree because people have moved away from John and Patsy Ramsey as possible suspects. And so then you're sort of faced with this question of,
Who the heck was in that house? How'd they get in? Why'd they target her?
and to some degree that makes it even more fascinating.
There was a person seen going across the lawn of the Ramsey house the night of the murder. Was an air killer trying to get into the house.
In September, we met with the Boulder DA's office and PD.
And what we presented was a confidential list of our top 20 people of interest and the list of the 8 people of interest that our team had eliminated through DNA analysis.
We just don't feel at this point that they are actively investigating this case.
The Boulder Police Department says the Ramsey case is an active, ongoing investigation, but they have never publicly commented on the handling of the case.
This team isn't going to give up. There's a third generation.
My daughters and others will continue on with this case when we end up being too old to do it. But we're not going to stop investigating. We're just not going to do it.
This case boils down to the truth. The Ramsey And if the Ramseys didn't do it, then it's an intruder. And if it's an intruder, the intruder is still out there.
The case took its toll on the whole Ramsey family emotionally and financially over the years. John Ramsey would lose his job and spend millions on private investigators, lawyers, and security.
There are still people today, John, 22 years later, who believe you or Patsy or Burke had something to do with the murder of JonBenet.
I know that. And how could they have believed otherwise? Because that's what they were told. You know, even if we have a conviction, confession, and this person's in prison, there's going to be 5–10% of the population that still thinks we're guilty.
My dad certainly suffered a tremendous amount, but I think he's focused on life today and enjoying life with his family and grandkids, and he's remarried. Patsy died from cancer in 2006. She's buried in Marietta, Georgia, next to JonBenet.
In my mind, she's still my 6-year-old little girl. That's how I remember her. Every once in a while, I'll see a little child from behind, a little blonde-headed, ponytail girl, about 6 years old, and it catches me for a second because it looks like JonBenet.
The family has not lost the will to fight and the will to find the killer. We work on this daily. There's a group of dedicated volunteers that work on this daily. I want the trauma to stop for the family. And if we can find the killer, then the next generation doesn't have to live with that trauma and the unknown and the speculation. The only way to do that is to find out who did it. I think it's really important for people to understand that this case can be solved. There's a narrative out there that this is an unsolved homicide, and we just have to accept that as fact. And that is not the truth. If we leverage the evidence, we follow the facts, we will find this killer.
I used to give people my trust, and it was theirs to lose. Everybody carries a burden. They struggle with loss or heartbreak, but everybody has to have hope. Just recognize that there could be evil around you.